Hi, this is Martin from Elektro Partner. In this video we're going to take a look at a Renault Zoe, electric of course, and it's having charging problems. It keeps shutting off and we're going to try to figure out what's wrong. We've already started looking into it, and during the troubleshooting we realized we actually needed a reference car to take measurements from. The car we're having issues with is what we call a Renault Zoe with a Q motor, and Q stands for quick charge. It has a 43 kilowatt AC charging system, and it's quite a special setup where, among other things, it uses the windings in the electric motor to reach those 43 kilowatts. What we're actually going to troubleshoot isn't related to that, but the car we have over here next to it is what we call an R motor. It's also a Renault Zoe, but it has an R motor and it can only charge at 22 kilowatts. But for the troubleshooting we're doing, we can use this one as a reference car because we're dealing with a scenario here where we're missing some experience-based measurements, and that's why we brought this car in. So today we're getting all the equipment up and running, and it's all about AC charging on electric cars. Take a look here. The first thing we always do is confirm the customer's complaint. Here we have a three-phase charger which is connected to our three-phase socket on the wall, and we press start on it and then we begin charging at 16 amps. We just need to plug the connector into the car over here. And then at that point it should immediately commence the process of charging the device. So a red indicator means there's a fault with the charging, and now we need to see if we can figure out what that fault is. We have now confirmed the customer's complaint, and the next natural step in troubleshooting would of course be to read out the error code. It's always important to read out error codes in all of the car's control units, and with a Texa tester we call this a TGS3 scan. We've already done that here in advance, and if you take a closer look you can see that there is actually a permanent error code stored on the battery charge box. So after studying these error codes, there's no doubt that this is the error code I'll try to tackle first. So we need to see if there are any known solutions, so we can figure out what the next step is in this troubleshooting process for charging. Because a problem with charging can have many causes, so we're going to look up this error code in auto frontal. We've successfully selected the car, then proceed to go under the bulletin section, and subsequently we will try to enter the error code here. Unfortunately, there is no error code in auto frontal yet, so that means there are no known solutions. Auto frontal asks if we should try looking under the error codes tab, and when we do that, we can try to see if there is any information about this error code for the entire Renault brand and not just the selected car. We click here. Nothing here either, so there is absolutely no information available about known solutions for this error code. So now we have to troubleshoot the good old-fashioned way. To try to find a bit more information about this error code, I have opened the program All Data. And all data is raw original technical data, so that also means that the terms and everything else you have originally you need to use here as well. Renault doesn't use P error codes in their system, so a P06641E, that's how it is in the Renault world. So we just remove the P, and that's how they use the error code. So I'm trying to search for it here in all data, and when I search for it I get a couple of documents here, and then there's actually a diagnostic procedure that matches this car. So now we get an explanation and a diagnostic procedure from the car manufacturer on what we need to measure to determine what's wrong for this error code. So the first step in this troubleshooting is to check whether there are any other error codes stored. If any of these are stored, then we need to follow a different guideline. Let's go back into Texa, and we can see here that none of the other error codes are stored. So we move on here to step 2, which is electrical inspection. So in Renault terms, it now says here that we should have 115 microfarads when we measure into the charging socket. So we measure into a filter in there. And if we measure from mains live 1, which is just what we call phase 1 in Danish, and then to ground in the charging socket, then we should have these 115 microfarads plus or minus 10%. We need to do the same here in measurement 2. Now we just measure on phase 2 and again to ground, and the same with phase 3. So that's what the car manufacturer prescribes that we need to measure. That's what we're going to try now. So now we need to do the first measurement as the manufacturer instructs us to. And I have this nice breakout box here, and it's just really great when we're troubleshooting this. We could measure it down at the socket if we wanted to, but since we have this, it just makes it so we can really be sure that we're actually on the plug pins when we do this. we have a multimeter, and since we need to check capacitors, we select this setting down here, and I've connected it from phase 1 to ground as prescribed. And if you look at what we're measuring here, it's fluctuating a bit between no connection, OL, and 0. So at first glance, it's not the 115 microfarads as prescribed. We can try moving it over to phase 2. Let's see if it does the same. It does. We'll move to phase 3 to see if it does the same, and it does. So before we move on, I think just from a technical perspective, this seems like a rather odd measurement. So I would really like to measure this on a car that is fault-free, and that's why we've brought this car in. So why don't we just try to see what it measures? Because if there is a fault, then of course we should follow the procedure described by the car manufacturer. But right now we're at a crossroads where I'm a bit doubtful whether this is the right measurement to make. So we just need to try it on a fault-free car here next to us. So I'm connecting the breakout box to the car without any faults. All right, but 22 could be a charging system, but I'm pretty sure that what we're measuring now should show about the same. We're going back to phase 1 in relation to ground, and if you look more closely at the measurement, then we've tried on all 3 phases, and it's doing the same as the car with the fault. But let's just assume that the guidance we have from the car manufacturer is correct. So what should we do if we don't have the 115 microfarads? So let's go down here. Move on to the next step. Step 3. Now we need to check the capacitor inside the module. We are now 20 minutes into the troubleshooting, and by following the instructions from Renault, that is the car manufacturer, we've reached the point where we need to start taking the car apart. We brought in a donor car or a reference car that we could try to measure on, and those measurements were supposed to tell us whether we needed to take something apart or not. We measured the same things on it as on the fault-free one, and that worries me a bit as a mechanic. So I thought, maybe it's possible that we could just try, since we've only spent 20 minutes so far. Then we can just try to take some measurements ourselves here without following the manufacturer's instructions. And to do that, we have a measurement technique for it, which you can find here in Autofrontal. In Autofrontal, we focus on measurement techniques, and I select the category Electric Plug-in Hybrid. And here we have a measurement technique for general things regarding AC charging. And what I always find interesting is how far we get in the charging process before it fails. Just to get a better understanding of how far the car gets in the charging process before it fails, we've connected the breakout box, and the resistor in the charging cable is located here. So that's why we've already connected the breakout box here. I've also connected the Pico here, and then we have the tester where we can see live data from the OPC. So now I'm connecting the charging plug, and first we can just try to see what happens with the Pico. So at least we have the PP signal, and the CP is also active. I could clearly hear the high voltage electrical relays clicking, and we can distinctly see the powerful induction, and then quite suddenly it clicked once again. What we can see on the Pico here was the PP signal. It was pulled down, so now we know that the charging cable is fine, and that part is error-free. The next thing that happens is that it gets locked into the charging socket. We could both hear it lock, and I could also feel that the cable was locked, and we could see the feedback here in the live data. That's why, in Renault terms, it's called stock, but it's the same as saying the charging cable is locked. Then the CP signal starts, and the CP signal has the correct voltage values. It starts here at 9 volts, and the moment it begins charging, it drops to about 6 volts. The induction that occurs here is when the relays down in the high voltage area are activated. So this is where it actually starts charging. At some point here, a few seconds in, it stops charging, and then the CP signal goes back up to 9 volts. But what we know now is that this charging process itself is working properly and without errors. We've measured that. So now we need to figure out what is causing it to stop charging at this moment, because it's actually the car that's requesting to stop the charging, and we need to see if we can spot anything in the tester's live data if we try to record it. So I'll just go back and then we'll go into Texa. So I'll connect the charger in just a moment, and then we can try to look at the live data this time and see what happens. But because it happens so quickly, I'd like to take a flight record first. You can actually get a graphical display of the different values. You just double click and then you get a view here. But I'll just choose to take a flight record, and we do that down here. And I'm thinking 1 minute. That's plenty of time, and then I press record. I'll connect the charger, and then we can try to look at the values. We can actually see something with our eyes. and we're starting to charge here, and we can see the 3 phases. And then it already stopped charging, so we can go ahead and press stop now. Now I'd really like to see those values. So you just need to check this up here in the corner. We click on View, Interaction, Continue, and then we can try to look at the measurement. Here we can see what happens the moment the car is charging, and what we just noticed here was actually the voltage value between phases 2 and 3. There we measure a voltage of 311 volts, and between phase 1 and 2 we measure a voltage of only 92 volts, and between phase 1 and 3 we measure a voltage of 390 volts. So we have different voltage readings, and that's a bit mysterious because we're pretty sure, we're quite certain that it's not the 3-phase power coming out of the house that's the problem here. So we're going to try to dig a bit deeper into what it could be. Now let's try to do the same measurement on a fault-free car and pay special attention to the voltage values like we saw before. Connecting the charger. And we go over here and take a look. It's just in the process of authorizing it. Then charging starts. And what we can see on this car, which is fault-free, is that the voltage values are completely identical across the phases. The voltage measurements across the phases on a fault-free car are all around 380 volts. The car with the fault, we only had one of these measurements showing 380 volts, and the others were significantly further off. So looking back, I somewhat regret that I didn't get to test with a single-phase charger earlier. I guess I got a bit carried away by the information I found about Renault, where we ended up doing some measurements and such. But before we move on, I'd actually like to see if the car with the fault can even charge on a single-phase charger, because I forgot to check that during this process. Now let's go ahead and test that. We'll try testing it with a single-phase charger instead, what we call the granny charger. And we plug it in, it locks, and we take a look at the process up here on the screen. It starts charging. And actually the charging works as it should on single-phase charging. The car has now been charging for a while with the granny charger, single phase, and it seems to be working. The SOC is increasing, so in that way we can charge the car. I kind of wish I had known that at the start of the troubleshooting, but well, that's how it goes sometimes. We just need to dig a little deeper into it. So it charges just fine on a single phase. When we look at the voltage values, between phase 1 and 3, we have a voltage difference of 218 volts. Between phase 2 and 3, we have 93 volts, and then between phase 1 and 2, we're all the way down to a voltage of 5 volts. And then it might be interesting to see how it looks on a car that is fault-free, and we've connected that one here. In the same way, it's also charging here with a single-phase granny charger. And if we look at the measurement values here on a fault-free car, we have the same value between phase 1 and 3 at about mains voltage, 230, 226 volts. But then we can see that between phase 2 and 3, we have 102 volts, and there were 95 on the one with the fault. But where we can really see a difference is here between phase 1 and 2. Here on a fault-free car, we're at 108 volts, whereas on the car with the fault, we were all the way down to 5 volts. So you can measure a difference here. The next thing I'd like to measure, just for fun before we take it apart, is to measure the capacitors between the phases. So let's try connecting the breakout box one last time and do this measurement. I've now connected the breakout box to the car with the fault, and now we're going to measure the capacitors between the phases. This car consists of a filter, as it's called here, a noise filter. And we have a distribution box, also called a junction block, and underneath sits the OBC. So when we measure the capacitors between the phases, we're measuring this entire circuit. So let's see what it shows between phase 1 and 2. There we measure 61 microfarads. Now let's try between phase 1 and 3. Also 61 microfarads. Now we measure from phase 2 to 3. And here we measure a slightly bigger difference, yes, 67, 66 microfarads. So it deviates a bit here between phase 2 and 3, but whether that's enough, I don't know. Let's try measuring one that's fault-free and see if that gives us any more insight. I'll try to do the same measurement on this Renault Zoe. This is the one without any faults. Granted, it's a slightly different model, but I still expect these capacitors to be pretty much the same. So let's try measuring between the phases on this one. Phase 1 to 2, we measure 42 microfarads. Phase 1 to 3, 42 microfarads. And phase 2 to 3, 42. That's actually pretty precise. So based on this, I have to say that this one measures exactly 42 microfarads between all the phases, whereas with the other one, we actually had a small difference between one of the phases, was at about 7 microfarads. So there was a slightly bigger difference on the car with the fault, we can conclude. We have now measured the car according to the manufacturer's instructions, and we ended up having to start taking the car apart. But before we took it apart, I still thought we should try to get a bit smarter about the fault by taking our own measurement. We did that and compared it with a car that was fault-free, and we also learned a bit more from that. So now I've gone back to the point where I follow the manufacturer's instructions to find this fault. We have disconnected the car's power. I have followed the instructions in Autodata to do this. I am certified to work on electric cars, and I have performed my control measurements, and I have also waited to ensure that all the capacitors are discharged. So the next step will be to start taking some measurements. So if we just go back to the manufacturer's instructions here, the next step is simply to remove the electric vehicle charger casing assembly, and then we need to disconnect this AC capacitor module, and we need to measure it in relation to each phase and ground, and we should get a value of around 100 microfarads plus or minus 10%. So this AC capacitor module, you can try to see here where it's located. It's the little blue guy sitting down here, and that's the one we're going to take some measurements on, which we'll do with our multimeter, and we're checking the capacitor, so now we need to check each phase in relation to ground. So I'll put this on the ground wire down here. Can you just film down here? So here we're testing ground, and then we measure the 3 phases, and we'll see if they're within the 100 microfarad. 94.6. That's actually a decent measurement because it can actually go all the way down to 90. Now let us proceed and move forward to the subsequent and upcoming phase of our project. 95.8, also within range. And the last phase, it's hard to reach there. The number is 91.7. So that means the measurements are within this data, and if we say yes to that, then we need to replace the electric vehicle charger electronic filter. So we need to replace this noise filter which was sitting over here. We've already removed it and it's here now. So according to the manufacturer's instructions, this measurement is enough to indicate that the fault must be inside this one. So before we replace this part for 10,000, as a mechanic you can't help but get a bit curious to see if there's anything visible on it. So we've taken it apart a bit, and luckily there was actually something to see on it. The first sign is here in the cover. It looks like there's been some heat here and there where it sits over. Let me see if you can see it. Down here by the capacitors you can see that it's been quite hot. So at least it looks like we're on the right track here. So we'll just try to check if it's possible to repair this unit or if it just needs to be completely replaced. We've done a repair on the noise filter and we couldn't order the parts for it from the manufacturer, so we ordered them online. We've replaced all these capacitors, and if you take a look at one of these capacitors, you can clearly see that it's been hot. The inside of it has actually come out the side, and when we picked this one up, we desoldered it. So there was actually a resistor stuck to this inner part. So it ended up that we also had to make a repair down on the circuit board. So it's not an easy task if you're not used to repairing electronics. As I said, we replaced all these capacitors, and you can try to see here. If we look down into the noise filter, you can see all the black capacitors. They've been replaced. We've also applied this paste in between, and that's to secure the soldering against vibration. Down here on the side, there are 3 varistors, and we've replaced those as well. You can try to take a look at one of the old ones here. It looks like this. So it's obviously been hot. And since it's an overvoltage protection component that's supposed to protect everything at 500 volts, we thought we should probably replace that as well during the same repair. Just for fun, we tested them with our tester here. We test it with 1000 volts, and if we apply 1000 volts down here, it takes the 500 volts, as you can see here. And it does the same the other way around. So it's not that there's anything wrong with them, but we just decided to replace them for safety's sake, since they work a bit like a Zener diode. Before we removed the filter, we took a few measurements across the phases, and we measured a capacitance between the phases of 18.3 microfarads, 13.2, and 13.7. And it could be interesting to measure now, after we've replaced these capacitors, what we get when we measure across the same phases. We'll try measuring on one of the phases here. I just need to grab the right one. We're going to try measuring between one of the phases, and we've set it to the diode tester, and then we'll do a capacitor test. Here we're measuring across the phases on this one, 23.0, 23.1 microfarads, and then we measure across the next one, also 23.1 microfarads, and the last measurement is also 23.1 microfarads. So all three measurements are now identical, which confirms that we can do a before and after measurement that we can use in our bulletin. So this is definitely one of the easier measurements if we have this fault, and that's why we should, of course, include it in our bulletin. We've now reassembled the car, connected the high voltage, and so far things are looking really good. We've done a complete system scan on the car, a TCS3, and there are basically no faults on the car. But to get a better understanding of the problem and how we can measure on a fault-free car, we'll just take a look at the tester's live data in parameter measurement here after we've worked on the car. And we'll also try to do the same measurements with the breakout box. I've now selected my favorites list, which is about charging, the same one we looked at last time, and we'll just take a look at it here while I connect a 3-phase 16 amp charger. We're connecting it now, and then we'll look at the voltages. Those were the ones we had before. Only 400 volts or 380 volts on one of them. And we can also hear the sound now. It sounds really nice. It keeps all the martins away. So this confirms that we've fixed the error. We have full voltage on all three phases, the car is charging, and there are no error codes. And the repair was successful. Whether it's worth the time to do this compared to replacing the noise filter, that's up to each individual workshop to assess. But in any case, we found the fault inside, and that's something we like as mechanics. An important thing with a repair like this is also to try to measure the differences before and after, and the manufacturer would like us to take the measurement from phase to ground. That's why we have the breakout box connected again, and the manufacturer said there should be 115 microfarads. So we're just going to check if that's the case now that the car is fault-free. So we've connected our multimeter, and we're testing the capacitors, and we've now connected phase 1 to ground. And this is where we're supposed to measure the 115 microfarads. We're trying to check in relation to phase 2. Still absolutely nothing, and now in relation to the upcoming phase 3. So actually, if we were to follow the manufacturer's instructions, we would have to start troubleshooting again. But there's nothing wrong with the car. So in my opinion, I can't really see what we need this measurement for. The measurement we think could be interesting to do is to measure this across the phases instead. So if we try to test between phase 1 and phase 3, we now measure 71 microfarads. Phase 2 to phase 3, there we measure 72, and then we can just check phase 1 to 2, 72. So what we wanted to see with this measurement was basically just that we had the same measurement across all three phases. We should also take a quick look at what it shows in the tester's data when we load with a phase of 230 volts. And here we can also see a difference between before and after the repair on the three phases. We have learned many good things from this case, and one of them was of course these empirical values that we just measured, and we will of course include them in the autofrontal measurement before and after the repair. That is worth its weight in gold in this kind of troubleshooting. The car manufacturer's manual was good to have, but it wasn't really what made the big difference in this troubleshooting. We must always remember to approach things as professionals, and this is especially where education plays a major role. So be sure to participate in all the courses you get access to, especially when it comes to electric cars. If we take a look at autofrontal measurement techniques, we can try to have a look in here. We quickly figured out that it was during the charging process over here that it failed. That is, it interrupted the CP signal when we charged with three-phase. In hindsight, we probably should have started by just checking if it would also charge on single-phase, because if it can do that, then all these steps are actually in order. Yes, that's what we learned from this case. I hope you found it exciting to join us in this troubleshooting, and if you liked this video, please remember to give it a like, and we'll be sure to make more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching.